The heat lay over the base like a giant hand that refused to lift. The air vibrated, saturated with sand and kerosene. Through that trembling haze, a figure moved slowly, leaning on 2 aluminum crutches. Each step made the metal creak. Each breath carried the echo of a battle still too close. Staff Sergeant Riley Monro no longer needed to be told when to walk. Her body knew it even when everything in her screamed to stop. Before we get to the heart of the story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, give a thumbs up, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Her left leg was bound in bandages too tight. Beneath the white layers, blood was already forming dark halos. 3 days earlier, an improvised explosive device had gutted the combat engineering convoy. The lead vehicle had blown up like a tin can heated white-hot. The blast had thrown her 4 meters, snapping her tibia clean. Since then, she had walked with a limp, stubborn as if the mere idea of stopping would condemn her to vanish. In front of the logistics hangar, a group of young rangers freshly arrived from San Diego sheltered in the shade. Helmets off, nervous laughter, arrogance intact. One of them nudged his buddy. "Look at that. A crutch with stripes. Guess they really do recruit anyone, huh?" The others burst out laughing. It was the kind of laughter that doesn't kill anyone but slowly eats away at everything it touches. Riley clenched her jaw and looked straight ahead. She could have answered, she didn't. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to remind her she wasn't like the others. Under the dusty camouflage, you could make out the black and silver patch, the one she had earned at the cost of every vertebra. It didn't matter, to them, she was just a public relations miracle, not a brother in arms. The desert never had patience for difference. "Hey Sergeant," another voice called, "we can set up a ramp for you if you want." More laughter. "Or maybe a rolling chair," added a third. She stopped, turned her head slowly. Her gaze sliced through the noise. "That'll be enough," she said. "You sure? Looks like the fight didn't miss you." Her breath thickened. Her fingers whitened around the crutch handle. She thought of the explosion, of the heat that had melted the armor like wax, of the voice she had followed through the smoke, a man's voice, strangled, ordering her to fall back. The generals. A silence settled, broken only by a groan of metal, then another voice, deep, from behind the group. The rangers froze. On the ramp of the command building stood a man, also on crutches. His uniform bore 3 stars. General William Harrell descended slowly, each step matching Riley's pain. The young soldiers stepped aside, their laughter still hanging in the air like a sin no one dared name. "My general," one of them began. "We were just—" "I know what you were doing," Harrell cut him off. "You were laughing." He stood before them, his face hard and calm at once, then turned to Riley. "Sergeant Monro, I was looking for you." She straightened, surprised, almost defensive. "My general." The old officer's gaze slid to her leg, her crutches, then back to his own bandaged leg. "Same fracture, same surgeon, same day. El Manda, Route 601. 3 days ago. You remember?" She nodded, speechless. "That's her," he said, turning to the young men. "She's the one who pulled me from a burning APC, who dragged my body 200 meters under fire, who kept pressure on my wound for 47 minutes until the helicopter arrived." The wind lifted a curtain of dust between them. The rangers lowered their eyes. "You see a wounded woman?" Harrell continued. "I see the reason I'm still breathing. When you laugh at her, you laugh at my survival." Not another word. Even the flies seemed to have stopped buzzing. Harrell then saluted Riley slowly, hand to forehead, a 3-star general saluting a sergeant. The image cut through the burning air. Riley returned the salute mechanically, but her moist eyes betrayed a brief, raw pride. "Thank you for my life, Sergeant. I just did my duty, General." "You went beyond duty." Then, turning to the Rangers, all now standing at attention, he said, "Salute and remember this, we don't judge scars we haven't earned." Silence fell like a verdict. When he walked away, Harrell moved at the same pace as her. 2 broken silhouettes, advancing side by side in the white light. For the first time in 3 days, Riley felt that the pain had meaning, that it had a witness. Yet the war wasn't done with her. In the infirmary, an envelope was already waiting on the table. Summons. Article 32. Mandatory appearance. She stood still for a moment, staring at her name on the paper. A preliminary hearing, an accusation. And this time, the battlefield would be a courtroom. The hum of rotors still echoed in her head, that sound, part thunder, part metal, that never truly left her. Sometimes she found him again in the hollow of her dreams, just before the moment everything exploded. Riley Monro opened her eyes to the harsh white light of the field hospital. The smell of antiseptic mixed with dust and dried blood. Around her, makeshift beds, muffled groans, the clinking of instruments. A nurse passed without looking at her, focused on a soldier mumbling in his sleep. Her leg was suspended in a metal splint. A dull, constant pain pulsed up to her hip. But it wasn't the pain that kept her awake. It was the fear of forgetting, the fear that everything she had lived through out there would be erased under official reports and the empty phrases people write in debriefings. 3 days earlier, she had still been crawling along Route 601, dragging General Harl's lifeless body. Fire, gunfire, dust, it had all melted into a single red image. She remembered the taste of ash on her tongue, the sound of bullets hitting metal like a rain of stones. She had clenched her teeth, counted the seconds, then the helicopter, then darkness. When she woke up in Landstuhl, Germany, the first thing she heard was the rain against the window. Calm, steady rain, almost ironic. The war felt so far away. She blinked. To her right, a nurse with tightly pulled hair gave her a mechanical smile. "You're lucky, Sergeant Monro." "Lucky?" Riley repeated, her voice rough. "Yes, you could have lost the leg." She wanted to laugh, but her throat tightened. Luck had a strange taste. 2 weeks passed between x-rays, injections, and early rehab. Every morning, a young physical therapist made her bend her leg to the limit of what she could bear. Riley endured without a word. At the end of each session, she stayed alone in the room, breathing slowly, counting the tiles on the floor. The silence did her good. It was in that silence that they came for the first time. 2 men in dark suits, thick files in hand, not doctors, not field officers either. The badge on their chest read NCIS. "Staff Sergeant Monro, we need to talk about Helmand." They sat down without waiting for her permission. The younger one took notes, the older one watched. "Describe the events of May 12th, he said in a neutral tone. "The convoy left Hargrove at 8:43. We were 4 vehicles, 2 light armored, 2 logistics transports. Objective, extraction of sensitive material." Sensitive? "Were you authorized to use a sniper rifle on that mission?" "Yes." "Direct support section." "Yet, according to this report, you fired without authorization on an unconfirmed position." Riley frowned. "It was an enemy position. They were targeting us. General Harl didn't confirm that. He was unconscious." A heavy silence fell. The younger man tapped his pen. The older leaned forward. "You understand, Sergeant, there are procedures, and some decisions can be interpreted as violations of the rules of engagement." She locked eyes with him. "If I hadn't fired, the general would have been dead before the IED even exploded." They exchanged a quick glance, closed their file. "We'll be in touch." The door slammed. Riley remained still, fists clenched. She knew what that meant: administrative investigation, possible suspension, and above all, that word she hated, behavioral evaluation. That night, she had a nightmare. She saw the road again, the white light of the explosion, the general's body sliding out of the vehicle, his cry cut short by dust. She woke up with a start, drenched in sweat. A few days later, she was transferred to Walter Reed in the United States. The flight lasted 10 hours. She stared at the metallic ceiling of the medical plane, listening to the groans of other wounded soldiers. When they landed, she felt for the first time the chill of air conditioning that didn't smell like war. The military hospital was almost too clean. Everything shone: the walls, the floors, the faces of the doctors. Here, they erased the war beneath cleanliness. Riley still carried the smell of sand and fuel. People's eyes landed on her with a mix of curiosity and unease. One morning, as she tried to walk alone down the corridor, she heard a whisper behind her. 2 soldiers were speaking without lowering their voices. "That's her, the sniper, from the convoy?" "Yeah. Heard they're gonna discharge her." Apparently, she went beyond her orders. Classic. They want to prove they can say no to loud women. She didn't turn around. It wasn't the first time she'd heard that. Since BUD/S, since the first day she'd set foot on the sands of Coronado, they'd been testing her, watching her, waiting for her to fail. In her room, a small frame on the bedside table showed a photo, Riley with a helmet on her head, in the middle of her squad, her face blackened with soot. Behind them, a sunset over the Afghan mountains. Under the photo, an inscription engraved, "One shot, one life." When the doctor came in, she simply asked, "When can I go back to the field?" He looked up from his file, surprised. "Sergeant, you have a triple fracture and shrapnel in your calf. You're not going anywhere for months." "Then I'll wait," she said. But barely 3 weeks later, an envelope was slipped under her door. Red stamp, confidential, defense. Inside, an official summons for a hearing, Article 32. A handwritten note at the bottom, prosecutor assigned, CMDRJ, Pike. She sat on the bed, the letter trembling between her fingers, and a memory resurfaced, the exact moment when her rifle barrel overheated, the target collapsed, and everything shifted. She realized then that the war wasn't over. It had simply changed ground. The administrative base at Quantico looked like a prison without bars, the same beige walls, the same watched silence. Riley Monro was transferred there pending procedure, a military euphemism meaning they no longer knew what to do with her. Days stretched out between rehab sessions and paperwork. The crutches had become part of the decor. Every morning she walked through the corridor of Building C12, past offices where no one lifted their eyes. On the door of her room hung a sign, Restricted Personnel Transition Unit. That's where they put the wounded, the misfits, the inconvenient cases. In the cafeteria, conversations stopped when she passed. The rumors had done their work. "She's the sniper from the convoy, you know, the one who fired without orders. I heard she disobeyed Harl himself. No, worse, that she caused the second explosion." The words slid off her like rubber bullets. She drank her scalding coffee, staring out the window. On the training field, a group of recruits did push-ups in the mud. She remembered her own beginnings, the sand of Coronado, the instructor's voice yelling, "You don't belong here." She had answered him with miles of running and blood in her palms. But here, it wasn't endurance they tested, it was patience. One morning, a liaison officer entered her office. "Staff Sergeant Monro, you're summoned to JAG tomorrow at 0800 for a preliminary hearing, Article 32. He placed a thick file on her desk, then left without another word. Riley stared at it for a moment before opening it. Pages of reports, photos, annexes. At the top, in bold letters, United States Navy versus Riley Monro. She read slowly, line by line. Charge 1, violation of rules of engagement, use of lethal force without radio confirmation. Charge 2, endangerment of a superior officer through breach of safety protocol. Charge 3, destruction of classified material. She frowned. Classified material, it referred to the same vehicle reduced to ashes, and now she was being accused of causing its loss. The last page bore the signature of the prosecutor, CMDR Jonathan Pike. The name rang a bell, a former operator turned lawyer, known for his obsession with absolute duty. Those he prosecuted rarely walked away free. The next day, Riley entered the JAG building. The walls reeked of formality. A young assistant gestured for her to wait. After 10 minutes, the door opened. Pike was standing behind a desk where every file was aligned to the millimeter. "Staff Sergeant Monro, take a seat." She remained standing. "I'd rather stay like this." He raised an eyebrow. "As you wish. You're aware of the gravity of the charges?" "I've read them." "Very well. Do you admit to having fired without explicit authorization?" "I fired to save lives." "That's not the question." He opened a file and took out a photo of the convoy after the explosion. "Look here, armored vehicle number 2. You claim the shots came from a position 300 meters away. Yet no thermal trace confirmed it because the sensors were out of service after the first blast. You understand that without visual proof, your version is, let's say, difficult to defend." Riley crossed her arms. "The proof, I dragged it to the evacuation zone. It's still breathing." Pike remained impassive. "It's not for me to judge. The hearing will decide." He closed the file and leaned slightly forward. "I advise you to plead confusion. Trauma, shock, post-explosion disorientation. It could spare you prison." "I don't plead confusion." "You'd rather risk a full court-martial?" "I'd rather tell the truth." A tense silence. The ticking of a clock covered their breathing. Finally, Pike stood up. Very well, Sergeant. Then tomorrow, be ready. On the defendant's bench, no one sees your record, only your mistakes. When she left the office, an empty corridor awaited her. She felt the cold crawl up her spine. Outside, a fine rain had begun to fall. She crossed the parking lot slowly, her crutches slipping on the wet asphalt. A pickup stopped beside her. Behind the wheel, a young soldier hesitated, watching her. Sergeant Monro. Yes? I was at Landstuhl. I saw you there. You talked to me while they were operating. You told me not to fall asleep. If I still have my leg, it's because of you. Riley blinked, surprised. What's your name, soldier? Private First Class Grayson. She nodded. Then keep that leg safe. You paid dearly for it. The vehicle drove off, splashing dirty water. Riley remained alone, heart heavy but standing tall. Tomorrow, she would go from silent hero to public defendant. She returned to her dorm, sat on the bed, and opened her notebook. One single line written slowly, like a promise: they want to silence me. I'll speak louder. The morning of the preparatory meeting, the room smelled of cold coffee and new paper. Riley sat in silence facing a whiteboard lined with keywords: ROE, ballistics, chain of command, witness. The door opened. A woman entered, immaculate uniform, brown hair pulled back, clear, calm eyes. Lieutenant Amelie Duffert, JAG Defense. I'll be your attorney. Her voice was steady, not warm, but not cold either. Riley stood, shook her hand. Thank you for coming. I wasn't invited, Sergeant. I was assigned to your case because no one else wanted it. Riley gave a half-charming, half-weary smile. Don't take it personally. Cases involving a general tend to scare off promising careers. Duffert set down her briefcase, pulled out a stack of annotated documents. I've read the NCIS reports, 3 different versions of the same day. One paints you as a hero, one as a threat, the last as a walking procedural error. And which one will they choose? The one that suits the Pentagon. She looked up. You had a radio recorder on your vest? Yes. PRC 163 model. Secured channel, but it melted in the explosion. I suspected as much. And the digital logs? Transmitted with the rest of the destroyed equipment. So no audio evidence. Wonderful. Duffert sat down, crossed her legs, and opened her notebook. All right. We start from zero. Tell me everything, from the departure to the explosion. Not the official versions. Yours. Riley inhaled. The images came back, sharp, vivid. The convoy stretching through the valley, the hot wind, dust sticking to her neck, the steady hum of the armored vehicle, then the detonation, that white flash swallowing everything. She described every detail: the smoke, the metal, the heat, the radio crackling, the general's voice cut short, the shot she had to take, quick, instinctive, precise, the bullet that took down the lookout with the detonator, then the silence before the second explosion. Duffert took notes without interrupting. So you're certain the shot neutralized the IED trigger? Yes. And without that shot, the second blast would have killed the whole convoy? Exactly. Then we'll prove it. Riley looked up. How? Without recordings? With logic and science. For 3 days, they worked without rest. Duffert reconstructed the scene on a satellite map, distances, angles, wind speed, the exact timeline. She brought in a civilian ballistics expert, a former FBI agent. Together, they calculated the trajectory of a 300-meter shot with the 13 Malawian Crutches rifle Riley had used. Result: it was impossible for the secondary explosion to have been caused by her weapon. You see? Duffert said, tapping the paper. The delay between the shot and the second explosion is 1 to 2 seconds. At that distance, no shockwave could have triggered the armored vehicle's fuel tank. It was a remote charge. So either they're lying, or they're covering for someone. That same evening, a witness quietly called in, a corporal named Vickers, a survivor from the convoy. His voice trembled. Ma'am, I saw an American drone in the area that day, not listed in the mission plan. Can you prove it? No, but I heard the laser designators beep just before the first explosion. Duffert wrote everything down. The next day, the witness was declared unavailable for medical reasons. Transferred out of state. There you have it, she exhaled. They're smothering it. The media had begun to catch the scent of the story. Headlines appeared, "A sniper fires without orders." The army remained silent. Commentators debated the illusion of equality. Photos of Riley in uniform circulated, often poorly cropped, paired with out-of-context quotes. In Quantico's corridors, the stares grew heavier. Some greeted her out of defiance, others turned away. She kept her head high, even when pain pulled at her leg. One night, as she worked late in the JAG room, Duffert set down her pen. "Do you know why they're coming after you, Riley? Because I disobeyed? No. Because you succeeded where they hoped you'd fail. You survived, and that's unforgivable for some." Riley looked at her for a long moment. "So what do? We don't play their game. We bring facts. We don't shout. We dismantle, slowly, cleanly." She pointed at the stack of files on the table. "Tomorrow, I'll file a motion to obtain partial declassification of the convoy's data. It'll take time. But if we can get even a fragment of the telemetry, we'll have them." Riley exhaled. "And if we get nothing? Then we'll have the oldest argument in the world, courage." The night stretched on, the neon buzzing overhead. Riley closed her eyes for a moment. She saw herself again under the Hellman's sun, burned hands, blood on her vest, the voice of General Harlot as she dragged him from the flames. That memory kept her standing. At dawn, Duffert received an encrypted message. Her request had been forwarded to High Command. "Response expected within 72 hours, she said. 3 days, Riley repeated. 3 days to know if we have a chance. 3 days is long, Duffert replied, when you're waiting for a shot. She gave a brief smile. Then let's prepare, because they'll strike first. The dawn of the hearing was a gray without promise. On the parking lot of the Norfolk Military Tribunal, the wind stirred the flags without conviction. Riley Monro stepped out of the service vehicle, escorted by 2 military police officers. The metal cuffs snapped shut around her wrists. She didn't protest. She knew what the gesture meant, setting an example. A reminder that even heroes must bow. In the hallway, flashes burst. Journalists weren't allowed inside, but the Army's cameras were filming everything. An anonymous officer murmured, "They want a clear image, the silent, handcuffed woman. It'll quiet internal debate." Riley kept walking, head high. If they wanted to make her a symbol, then they'd have to own their theater. The courtroom was cold, perfectly symmetrical. On the left, the prosecution, on the right, the defense. Before them, a panel of stiff, impassive military judges. At the center stood Prosecutor Commander Jonathan Pike, papers aligned with military precision. He didn't need to raise his voice to command the room. When Riley entered, all conversation stopped. The clinking of her chains echoed on the scarlet floor. Duffert walked beside her, calm, almost glacial. She shot a look at the bailiff. "The handcuffs aren't necessary." "Command's orders," the man replied without looking at her. Riley sat down slowly, the metal biting into her skin. Her dress uniform barely hid the stiffness of her injured leg. Her decorations gleamed under the harsh light, 3 campaigns, 2 Purple Hearts, 1 commendation, and yet, on paper, she was now a defendant. Pike began to speak. "Members of the council, we are here to judge an act of blatant disobedience. On May 12th, Staff Sergeant Monro opened fire without authorization, compromising a classified operation and causing the destruction of strategic equipment." His voice did not waver. He delivered his speech like an equation already solved. "This trial is not about a woman, nor about a self-proclaimed heroine. It is about a violation of the chain of command, the cornerstone of our armed forces." He paused, letting the silence settle. "Some will say she acted with courage, others that she saved lives. But courage without discipline becomes chaos, and chaos on a battlefield kills." Duffert took notes, expressionless. When her turn came, she stood up with calculated slowness. "The defense will remind this court that discipline means nothing without judgment. Sergeant Monro acted in an extreme emergency. Her shot neutralized an imminent threat, and the facts we will prove show that she saved not 1 life, but 17. A murmur rippled through the room. The judges exchanged glances. Pike gave a brief, almost condescending smile. "We shall see what the evidence says under scrutiny." The first witness called was a communications operator, Sergeant Lewis. He confirmed that all radio contact had been lost just before the explosion. So, asked Pike, Sergeant Monro received no order before opening fire? No, sir. Thank you. No further questions. When Duffert spoke, her voice remained gentle. Sergeant, you said the radio signal was cut. So how can you state with certainty that she didn't receive an order? Silence. The witness blinked, confused. I can't. The audience held its breath. Pike frowned but didn't react. The second witness, a surviving lieutenant, described Riley as agitated and impulsive after the first explosion. You say she left cover to reach the lead vehicle? Yes. And you? I stayed in position. You didn't move? No. And yet, she pulled the general out alive. You didn't? The lieutenant's face froze. Duffert didn't raise her voice. She merely nodded. No further questions. During the recess, Riley sat alone on the bench, her wrists bruised. She watched the tinted windows behind which silhouettes passed, officers, observers, superiors, invisible judges on an upper floor. This trial wasn't just about her. It was meant to deter anyone who might follow her example. In the afternoon, Pike brought in a ballistic expert from N6. According to your analysis, could Monro's weapon have caused the second explosion? Theoretically, yes. And practically, let's say it's possible. Duffert stood immediately. Possible isn't proven. You reconstructed the scene on site? No, access was classified. So your testimony is based entirely on theoretical simulations? Yes. Thank you. That's all. The defense was gaining ground, but slowly, too slowly. Each small victory felt meaningless against the machinery of the system. At the end of the day, as the room emptied, a bailiff discreetly entered and handed a sealed envelope to the presiding judge. The man skimmed it quickly, then looked up. The hearing will resume tomorrow at 0900 hours. And note for the record, a new witness has come forward. Duffert stiffened. What witness? A senior officer, said the judge, closing the file. He left the room without another word. Riley and Duffert exchanged a glance. Pike didn't request this, murmured Duffert. Then who did? Someone above him. Outside, night fell, heavy and blue. Riley climbed into the transfer vehicle. The engine rumbled. The headlights swept across the courthouse gates. Her reflection in the window stared back, tired, but alive. She thought of Harlot, somewhere in Washington, and of the silent promise they had shared, tell the truth, no matter the cost. The next day, an admiral would walk through the courtroom doors, and nothing would ever be the same again. The following morning, the courtroom buzzed with restrained murmurs. The air felt heavier, charged with anticipation. Military journalists, officers, even the clerks wore that particular stiffness of days when something unexpected is about to happen. Riley Monro entered, escorted but silent. The handcuffs were gone, Duffert had finally had them removed, but the humiliation of the previous day still burned in her skin. Pike was already there, bent over his files, impassive. When he lifted his gaze to her, there was neither contempt nor hatred, only the cold satisfaction of someone convinced he had already won. The presiding judge gave the signal to begin. The council resumed session. We were informed late last night that an additional witness has been authorized to appear. This witness has received special clearance from the defense. Silence fell. Then the back doors opened. The man who entered made the entire room rise to its feet without a single order being given. The dark blue uniform, the gold epaulets, the 3 stars on the collar, a Navy admiral, but not just any. Admiral Richard St. Clair, commander of the Afghan Theater of Operations until the previous year. Pike paled almost imperceptibly. Mr. President, I was not informed. That's correct, the judge cut in. Authorization came directly from the Pentagon. The admiral walked forward unhurriedly. He stopped at the center of the room, looked first at the judge's bench, then at the prosecution, and finally at Riley. She held his gaze without flinching. I'm here, he said simply, to tell the truth about what really happened in Helmand. His voice filled the room, deep, clear, without embellishment. Duffert stepped forward slightly. Admiral, can you specify under whose orders you're testifying? Under my own, he replied, and under the Department of Defense. Part of the file was declassified this morning at 0600 hours. He produced a sealed envelope and handed it to the judge. The Pentagon's official seal gleamed under the lights. The judge opened it, read quickly, then nodded. You may proceed. St. Clair took a slow breath. On May 12th, I was in direct contact with General Harlot. Sergeant Major Monro's convoy was transporting an experimental jamming device. Communications were deliberately cut by an enemy operator. The proof is here: satellite data, transmission logs, mission orders. He placed the documents on the table. Thermal signatures identified at 8:47 confirmed the presence of a spotter armed with a remote detonation device. Sergeant Monro's shot neutralized that threat. Less than 2 seconds later, a secondary IED exploded, proving there were 2 separate charges. A murmur rippled through the room. Pike struggled to maintain his composure. Admiral, this information appears in no official report. Because it was classified until this morning, Commander, St. Clair replied evenly, and because there was an attempt to protect several officers responsible for ignoring a threat signal transmitted 2 hours before the convoy's departure. The prosecutor's face tightened. Duffert remained impassive, though her pen trembled slightly. St. Clair slowly turned toward Riley. Sergeant Major Monro, can you confirm that you received specialized long-range shooting training for close protection missions? Affirmative, sir. And that your mission orders included covering the lead vehicle? Yes, sir. Then your shot was in full compliance with the rules of engagement. You carried out exactly what you were sent to do. The judges exchanged quick glances. Pike tried once more. Admiral, nothing proves that her shot actually prevented the general's death. You want proof? St. Clair asked calmly. He pointed toward the back door. It's right there. A moment later, the door opened again. General Harlot entered, leaning on a cane. The entire room froze. Some soldiers stood without realizing it. He gave a brief nod to the judges, then turned toward Pike. You're looking for proof, Commander? Here it is. I'm still breathing, thanks to her. Pike said nothing. The general moved to the witness stand, limping. I was in the lead vehicle. I remember the blast, the fire, the pain, and a hand pulling me out of the molten metal. It was hers. The silence was absolute. Harlot turned to the council. I swear under oath that Sergeant Major Monro saved my life and acted fully in accordance with her mission orders. Any attempt to portray her as at fault is a betrayal of the duty we share. The presiding judge leaned forward. The testimonies of Admiral St. Clair and General Harlot will be entered into the record. The hearing is suspended until the declassified evidence is verified. The gavel struck. The room emptied slowly. But no one spoke. You could have heard a pin drop. In the hallway, Duffert briefly shook Riley's hand. It's over. They can't bury you now. No, Riley answered softly. Not yet. But they'll try. Behind her, Pike walked away, stiff, pale, clutching his file to his chest like a wound. And in the empty room, the Admiral's 3 stars still glimmered faintly under the artificial light. On the 3rd day of the trial, the courtroom had changed. The air was denser, as if everyone was breathing slower. The journalists allowed in the gallery no longer took notes. They simply watched, aware they were witnessing something that would never happen again. On the defense table lay a pile of sealed documents now stamped with the Pentagon's red mark, declassified, partial level. Duffert had received them at dawn, escorted by a security officer. The pages contained satellite data, transmission logs, and thermal maps of the mission, the kind of evidence no prosecutor ever wants to see enter a courtroom. The presiding judge gave the order. We will resume the session. Lieutenant Duffert, the floor is yours. She stood, straight, expression closed. Thank you, Mr. President. The defense submits to the record the evidence declassified this morning, confirming the presence of an enemy operator positioned 310 meters north of the convoy. This point, identified on the thermal maps, matches exactly the trajectory of the shot fired by Sergeant Major Monro at 8:47. She pointed to a screen. The map appeared, blotched in red and yellow, the trace of isolated human heat. This silhouette disappeared at the precise moment Monro fired. 1 second later, the IED exploded. The judge nodded. And according to telemetry, the shot did indeed come from her 13 Malawian Crutches rifle. No other shooter was in position. What the prosecution described as an act of disobedience was in fact a protective shot authorized under the Guardian Watch protocol. The murmur in the room rose uncontrollably. Pike stood abruptly. Objection. These readings could have been falsified. Falsified by the Department of Defense? Duffert replied calmly. A nervous laugh broke somewhere in the back, quickly stifled. The judge consulted the file and nodded. Objection overruled. Continue. Duffert resumed. Commander Pike claimed that Sergeant Monro acted without orders. Yet these communications, recorded on a parallel channel, prove that implicit authorization had been given by General Harlot before the radio cut. She pressed a button. The room froze. A crackling but recognizable voice came from the speakers. Monro, priority to Alpha vehicle. Fire authorized if contact confirmed. Copy, Alpha, I have visual. Then the sharp sound of a shot, followed by an explosion. A brutal silence swallowed the room. Pike's face lost all color. He tried to recover. That channel wasn't listed. Exactly, Duffert cut in. It's the one that was forgotten from your initial report. She slid another document toward the judge. Internal NCIS note dated May 14th, do not include Bravo Channel Annex files until classification review complete. She raised her eyes to Pike. You were already in charge of the case at that time. You knew? He said nothing. The silence became a collective verdict. Even the judges seemed afraid to breathe too loudly. Duffert continued, more softly. So it wasn't an error. It was a cover-up. A wounded, decorated woman was easier to sacrifice than a defective protocol signed by senior officers. One of the judges slowly nodded, then spoke. Commander Pike, do you wish to respond? The prosecutor rose, stiff, his hands trembling. I was not aware of the existence of that channel. Yet your signature appears on the note, Duffert pointed out. He collapsed back into his chair, speechless. Then Admiral St. Clair stood, breaking the silence. Allow me to add something. This case was never about procedure. It was about fear. Fear that a woman would accomplish, under fire, what men hesitated to attempt, and fear that it would set a precedent. His gaze swept the room. That fear falsified reports, diverted evidence, and defiled a name. Today, this tribunal has a choice, to protect a reputation, or to restore honor. The judges exchanged a long look. Then the presiding officer declared, the council will adjourn for deliberation. The room emptied in cathedral silence. Riley remained seated, motionless, her eyes lost in the void. Duffert placed a hand on her shoulder. They have no way out now. They've always managed to invent one before, Riley replied quietly. Behind the glass, Pike was leaving, escorted by 2 officers. His career ended there. The sharp crack of the gavel marked the end of the hearing. This time, the truth had hit harder than bullets. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Even the highest-ranking officers had shown up, not to see justice served, but to see how the institution would save face. Riley Monro entered without an escort, her uniform immaculate, her crutches set aside. Her leg barely held, but she refused any help. That day, she wanted to stand whole, upright, alive. The military judges took their seats. The presiding officer consulted a few papers, adjusted his microphone, then looked up. Special Counsel of the Armed Forces, case of Monro, final verdict. Silence fell. Charge number 1, violation of rules of engagement, not guilty. Charge number 2, endangering a superior officer, not guilty. Charge number 3, destruction of classified equipment, not guilty. A murmur rose like a wave. The presiding officer raised his hand to quiet it. However, the council issues a recommendation, the immediate review of communication protocols in the field and the re-evaluation of coverage procedures in mixed missions. Then he turned toward Riley. Sergeant Major Monro, the council recognizes that your actions on May 12th saved the lives of 17 soldiers, including a general in active service. You acted in accordance with your training and the spirit of duty. You are reinstated in your rank, and all your distinctions are restored. The gavel struck. End of the trial. Riley didn't move. She stared ahead, her gaze empty, as if the words no longer reached her. Around her, the room slowly dispersed, between relief and discomfort. Some officers avoided her eyes, others, younger ones, looked at her with silent admiration. Duffert leaned toward her. It's over. No, Riley murmured. Nothing's ever over. Admiral St. Clair approached, his uniform impeccable, his face lined. Sergeant Major, you've given back to the uniform what it had lost, decency. With all due respect, sir, I only refuse to let them take it from me. He gave a tired smile. Maybe. But today, many will stand a little straighter because of you. Riley nodded. And others will never forgive me for it. Outside, the sun was harsh. In front of the tribunal, a crowd of journalists, soldiers, civilians. Cameras searched for her face. A microphone was thrust forward. Sergeant Monro, a word for the women of the army? She hesitated for a second, then answered calmly, we aren't given our place. We take it, and keep it. She walked away under the flashes, her step slow but steady. That same evening, in Commander Pike's office, the shutters were half closed. He was signing his letter of resignation. 2 NCIS officers waited in the hallway. The scandal would be discreet, hushed up, but enough to erase his name from the commissions. In Washington, an internal memo circulated, recommended reform, operational integration and command discipline. A bureaucracy was fixing, in its own way, an injustice it had itself created. 2 weeks later, a ceremony took place in the Pentagon's Hall of Honor. Harlot, still leaning on his cane, pinned the silver star on Riley. No grand speeches, no cameras, just a firm handshake and a few quiet words. You pulled me out of the fire. Today, I wanted to be here to pull you out of the ashes. She replied with an almost imperceptible smile. Then we're even, General. Around them, a few officers applauded discreetly. The air smelled of closed files, but in the eyes of some young soldiers, something had changed. After the ceremony, Duffert joined Riley on the steps. You could capitalize on all this, you know, conferences, interviews, documentaries? No. Why not? Because this isn't a victory. It's just the end of one battle. And I prefer the kind of fields where you can still get your hands dirty. She straightened up, gazing toward the base in the distance, the planes taking off in the orange light. You know, Lieutenant, in the Army, scars rarely show on the skin. They settle in the silence. Duffert nodded. And now? Now I'm going home, she said quietly. Riley left the building without looking back. Her silhouette disappeared among the long shadows of the fading day. That evening, in her official file, a paragraph was added, acted with honor, courage, and clarity under fire. Maintained mission integrity despite hierarchical pressure. For once, the words on paper were true. Dusk fell over the Coronado firing range. The air smelled of gunpowder and salt. The sound of waves crashed against the distant cliffs. A line of white targets stood under the fading light. Riley Monro adjusted her scope, finger resting on the trigger, her breathing slow and steady. The shot rang out, the bullet split the air and pierced the exact center. Not a breath of hesitation. She calmly reloaded, fired 5 more rounds, all in the same line. The recruits behind her watched in silence. Some were women, others not, but all had that same look, a mix of respect and awe. Riley set the rifle down and straightened up. Her leg no longer trembled. She wasn't healed, she never would be completely, but she was standing. That was enough. A young operator approached, frail, nervous. Sergeant Monro, they told me you'd be training us starting today. They told you right. Name? Sloan, first class. Your first cycle? Yes, ma'am. Riley looked at her for a moment. She recognized in her eyes the same fear she'd felt the first time she'd stepped onto that sand, the fear hidden under the mask of courage. They already made you feel like you don't belong here, Sloan? More than once. Good. That means you do. A shy smile crossed the young woman's face. Riley handed her the rifle. Show me your shot. Sloan lay down, took position, aimed. Her first shot hit low and to the left. Riley said nothing. She crouched beside her. Watch your breathing. Inhale, hold, release. Don't pull the trigger, let the shot go on its own. The second bullet hit the edge of the center. Riley nodded. Better. The difference between a good shooter and a dead one is a breath. Remember that. Behind them, the wind had picked up, making the flags snap on their masts. The sun blazed red on the horizon, and for a moment, everything seemed suspended, the noise of the world, the memories, the pain. Only the sea, the metal, the breath. A familiar voice broke the silence. Good shooting, you haven't lost your touch, Sergeant. Riley turned. General Harlot was walking toward her slowly, no cane this time. He'd traded his uniform for a simple light shirt. Seeing him like that, standing, almost at ease, moved her more than she wanted to admit. "My general," she said. "I'm no longer in service," he replied with a smile. "Call me William." She gave a quiet laugh. "You're doing well for a man who cheated death." "Thanks to you." "And you?" "I shoot. I breathe. I teach. That's enough." They walked a few steps side by side. The wind carried the scent of salt and gun oil. "You know," said Harlot, "your story still circulates through the halls. Some draw inspiration from it, others keep their distance." "The army doesn't like ghosts," she replied. "And I've become one. Ghosts have their uses. They remind the living of what they don't want to see." He looked at her for a long moment. "You could have left all this, opened a clinic, written a book, spoken on TV. Why stay here?" "Because here, they still learn to aim straight. Out there, they only learn to talk." Harlot nodded, understanding. "Then keep aiming straight." He extended his hand, she shook it silently. Then he walked away toward the road, his shadow stretching long over the sand. Riley stayed for a while, watching the sun disappear beyond the sea. She picked up her rifle, loaded another round, and fired again. The shot cracked, clean and sharp. Sloane approached. "Sergeant, what do you do when everyone wants you to fail?" Riley looked at her for a long time, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You fail later, after you've won." She put her helmet back on, gave one last glance at the sea, and added calmly, "We're not given anything, Sloane. So take everything, even what they think they're keeping." The last shot echoed in the dying light. The silhouettes on the firing line stood still, caught between respect and silence. When night fell, Riley packed up her rifle, resting a hand on the stock like on a living memory. Her reflection in the scope looked back at her, tired, scarred, but standing. Still standing. And in that steel mirror, one could almost read a motto: some soldiers don't need to stand tall to rise above the others. She exhaled, then left the range. Behind her, the bullets still vibrated in the air, like the stubborn memory of a war she had finally won.